The execution plaza of the Azure Cloud Sect was unusually quiet today. No birds, no wind, only the heavy pressure of judgment hanging in the air. Kael Veyron stood in the center of the stone platform, his wrists bound by cold iron chains etched with spirit suppression runes. Above him, sect elders sat in a semicircle, like gods deciding the fate of an insect. And then, a voice shattered the silence. Kill him. The sect does not tolerate traitors. The words were calm, final, unquestionable. A ripple passed through the crowd of disciples below the platform. Some looked away. Some smirked. Some watched with cold indifference. But none stepped forward. No one defended him, not even the person he once called master. Kael did not struggle. He did not shout. He simply looked at the elder who had spoken. Elder Muhan, the law enforcement elder of the Azure Cloud Sect. The man who had once patted his shoulder and called him disciple. Now, that same man looked at him like he was already dead. The accusation is clear. Elder Muhan continued. Kael Veyron stole 3 Spirit Condensation Pills from the inner storage hall. A murmur spread through the crowd. Spirit Condensation Pills. Rare, valuable, reserved for inner disciples. A crime worthy of death. Kael finally spoke. His voice was calm. Too calm. I did not steal them. A short silence followed. Then a laugh. Not loud. Not amused. Cold. Another elder leaned forward slightly. A trash disciple with no background, no talent. And you expect us to believe your words? The pressure of spiritual energy descended. Kael's knees almost touched the ground. But he did not fall. That alone made a few eyes narrow. Strange. Very strange. A normal outer disciple should have already collapsed under this pressure. But Kael's eyes remained steady, unmoving, unbroken. Elder Muhan raised his hand. That is enough. The verdict had already been decided. No trial is necessary. The evidence is irrelevant. The stolen pills were last seen near your residence. Kael's gaze shifted slightly. So that was it. They never intended to investigate. Just a convenient scapegoat. A silence stretched again. Then, throw him into the dungeon. The sentence dropped like a blade. Instantly, 2 enforcers stepped forward and grabbed Kael's arms. The iron chains tightened. Spirit suppression seals activated. Kael felt his body grow heavier, slower, like the world itself was rejecting him. Still, he did not resist. Not because he accepted it, but because resistance meant nothing here. As he was dragged off the platform, he finally looked at the crowd. All those faces, all those years of effort, none of it mattered. A disciple whispered as he passed. That's what happens when trash tries to rise above his place. Kael didn't respond, but something deep inside him went still. Not anger, not fear, something emptier. The dungeon entrance was below the sect grounds. A massive stone gate embedded into the mountain itself. Darkness leaked from within like it was alive. The enforcers stopped at the entrance. "This is where you belong," one of them muttered. The gates opened. Cold air rushed out, and Kael was thrown inside. He hit the stone floor hard. Clang. The gates closed behind him. Locking. Silence returned. Darkness swallowed everything. No light, no sound, only pressure and decay. Kael slowly lifted himself from the ground. His chains clinked softly. He looked around. Nothing. Just endless dark stone corridors fading into unknown depths. Then, a faint sound echoed inside his mind. Not external. Internal. A distorted voice. Error. Kael froze. The voice continued. Detecting incompatible existence. Initiating binding process. His eyes narrowed slightly. What is this? And for the first time since he was thrown into this place, the dungeon did not feel empty anymore. Something was watching him. Something inside him was being touched. The voice echoed again, louder this time. Binding, 10%, 20%. Kael's expression finally changed. Not fear, but interest. Very slight, almost invisible. System? And at that moment, the darkness responded. Darkness. That was the first thing Kael Veyron truly experienced after the gates closed behind him. Not silence, not emptiness. Darkness that felt heavy, as if it had weight, as if it could press against his bones. The dungeon floor beneath him was cold stone, uneven and damp. Every breath he took carried the faint scent of decay mixed with old spiritual residue. Kael slowly pushed himself up. The chains on his wrists clinked softly. Spirit suppression runes continued to drain his strength, making even standing feel like resistance against the world itself. He did not speak. He simply looked forward. But his mind was not empty. It drifted backward. He remembered the sect, Azure Cloud Sect, a place that outsiders called a path to immortality. But for Kael, it had always been a place of distance. Outer disciples trained in open courtyards filled with sunlight and spiritual mist. Inner disciples walked elevated stone paths, dressed in refined robes, surrounded by admiration. Elders resided above all, in floating halls suspended by formation arrays. And Kael? He stood at the bottom, always at the bottom, cleaning training grounds, carrying supply crates, standing outside lecture halls. He was not allowed to enter. He had no master who truly guided him. Only assignments, only silence. He once tried to watch a sword technique demonstration from afar. An inner disciple noticed him. Why is Trash standing here? That was all it took. He was dragged away before the demonstration ended. Back in the present, in the dungeon, Kael's fingers tightened slightly. Not in anger, just memory. Years passed inside the sect like that. No one remembered his name unless he made a mistake. And when he did, it was never small. Because small mistakes from nobody disciples were not worth attention. But accusations? Those were useful. The Spirit Condensation Pills. That was what they said he stole. But Kael remembered that day clearly. He had been assigned to clean the storage corridor. No guards noticed him, because no one ever looked at him for long. He walked in, walked out. That was it. But later, 3 pills were missing, and suddenly he became the only possible culprit. No investigation, no inquiry, only conclusion. Because conclusions were faster than truth. Kael exhaled slowly in the dungeon, his breath fogged slightly in the cold air. Above him, faint cracks in the stone ceiling allowed thin strands of dim light to leak through. But even that light felt distant, unreachable. Outside these walls, the sect continued as if nothing had happened. Training continued. Disciples competed. Elders discussed cultivation laws. And his name would slowly fade into something convenient. A traitor, not a person, just a label. Kael lowered his head slightly. Still no emotion appeared on his face. But something inside him shifted. Not breaking, not collapsing, just changing direction. As if something deep inside him had stopped waiting, stopped expecting. Then, a faint vibration, inside his mind. At first, it was subtle, like a glitch in reality. Kael paused. Again, the sound returned. Not external, not from the dungeon. Inside. Error. His eyes narrowed slightly. The voice from before. But now clearer, stronger. Host environment. Extreme suppression zone. Life stability, low. Unknown anomaly detected. Kael didn't move. He listened, silently. A faint blue light flickered in front of him. Not physical. A projection. Floating lines of text formed in the air like broken runes. Initiating binding process. The chains on his wrists suddenly tightened. Not physically, but energetically, as if reacting to something deeper than flesh. Kael finally spoke under his breath. "What are you?" The system did not answer immediately. Instead, the dungeon itself seemed to react. The air grew heavier. The spiritual residue in the walls began to tremble, like something ancient had been disturbed. Binding process, 5%, 12%. Kael looked at the floating text. For the first time since arriving here, his stillness broke slightly. Not fear, not shock, curiosity, very faint, but real, because for the first time in his life, something was acknowledging his existence, not as trash, not as invisible, but as a target of something unknown. And in that moment, Kael Veyron stopped thinking about the sect, stopped thinking about the accusation, stopped thinking about everything above him, because something inside the dungeon was starting to look back at him. The The dungeon was no longer silent. Not truly. Something had changed the moment the binding process began. The air itself felt divided, as if two forces were trying to observe the same space at the same time. Kael Veyron remained seated on the cold stone floor. His chains still glowed faintly, suppressing his body, but they no longer felt like the most important thing in this place. Something else had taken priority. The voice inside his mind continued, not speaking, calculating. Binding process, 18%. Warning, host energy signature unstable. Reevaluating classification. Kael's eyes narrowed slightly. Classification? The word echoed strangely in his mind, as if it had more meaning than it should. The blue holographic interface flickered again in front of him. This time, it did not show broken text. It showed structure, layers, like a map of reality itself unfolding. Scanning world framework. For a brief moment, Kael saw something impossible. The dungeon walls seemed to disappear in his perception, replaced by a vast invisible structure, a layered existence. Detected structure, mortal domain. A faint line of text appeared. Then another layer unfolded beneath it. Detected structure, cultivation domain. Kael did not understand it fully, but he felt it. Something vast above him. Something larger than the sect. Then the system paused. For the first time, the dungeon trembled slightly, not physically, but energetically, as if reality itself hesitated. Error. Second layer unstable. Recalculating. Kael tilted his head slightly. Unstable? The system continued, but now its tone was different, less confident, more fragmented, attempting higher layer detection. Connection failed. Authority denied. Kael's expression changed very slightly, not because he understood everything, but because he understood something simpler. The system was struggling. The blue interface flickered violently. Lines of text broke apart and reformed. Then, a new layer appeared. Detected, heavenly domain. A pause, longer this time. Then another layer tried to emerge beneath it, but it failed halfway. The text distorted, glitched. Detecting, error, undefined layer. Kael stared at the broken interface. Undefined, he repeated it softly. For the first time, the system did not answer immediately. Instead, a strange silence formed, like something on the other side had stopped moving. Then, a new message appeared, slower, heavier. Hosts cannot be classified within known frameworks. Reason. Existence exceeds structural limitations. Kael's fingers moved slightly. Chains clinked, but he did not notice them anymore. His attention was fixed entirely on the floating interface. What does that mean? He murmured, not to the system, not to anyone, just to himself. The system responded, but this time it hesitated between every line. It means you do not belong to any recorded cultivation path. You're outside defined progression laws. The dungeon suddenly felt colder, not because temperature changed, but because something in reality had shifted its attention. Kael didn't notice it yet, but far above the dungeon, inside the sect formation halls, a faint alarm rune flickered. Once, then went dark, back inside the dungeon. The system continued, re-attempting classification. Chi compatibility. Failed. Foundation mapping. Failed. Core structure detection. Failed. Each failed, echoed differently, heavier each time, like the system was losing confidence in reality itself. Kael slowly exhaled. So I don't fit anywhere. It wasn't a question, just observation. The system paused again, longer than before. Then, conclusion, anomaly class. The moment those words appeared, the dungeon walls trembled faintly. A ripple passed through space itself, as if something far away had finally noticed him. Kael felt it too. Not fear, not danger, but attention. For the first time in his life, something vast had looked in his direction, and it was not the sect. Binding process, 31%. Warning, external observation detected. Unknown authority response increasing. Kael lifted his head slightly. External? The system did not answer immediately. Instead, one final line appeared. Slower, heavier, almost reluctant. Host is being noticed by higher layer existence. Silence. The dungeon did not move, but everything inside it felt like it had stopped breathing. Kael remained still, but something inside him shifted again. Not awakening yet. Not fully. Just preparing. The dungeon was no longer just a place of imprisonment. It had become a testing ground, not for Kael Veyron, but for something else that was trying to understand him. The system interface in front of him flickered again, more violently than before, as if the more it tried to analyze him, the more reality itself resisted. Reevaluating complete power framework. Kael watched silently. He had stopped questioning it, not because he understood, but because the system seemed more confused than he was. The blue light expanded, and this time it began constructing a full structure, not of him, but of the world itself. Initializing cultivation framework database. Kael's eyes narrowed slightly. For the first time, he saw the world not as a place, but as a system of rules. A new layer appeared in the air. Lines of text formed like floating celestial scrolls. Power classification system activated. And then the explanation began. Not spoken, displayed. DNA cultivation realms. Mortal realm, body refining stage. Chi condensation realm, energy awakening. Foundation establishment realm, core stabilization. Core formation realm, golden core condensation. Nascent soul realm, soul separation. Spirit severing realm, soul transcendence. Void refinement realm, spatial manipulation. Ascendant realm, law resistance. Immortal realm, law control. Kael read it silently. Each line felt like a step in a staircase he had never known existed. But then the system paused again. Warning. Host does not conform progression hierarchy. Kael tilted his head slightly. Again, the system continued anyway, as if forced. Crossed swords weapon classification. New text appeared. Sharper. More structured. Weapon tiers established. Mortal weapons. Iron steel, forge blades. Spirit weapons. Chi-imbued armaments. King-grade weapons. Sentient armaments. Emperor-grade weapons. Law-infused weapons. Divine weapons. Self-aware artifacts. Kael looked at the list, then at his own chained wrists. The iron chains around him suddenly felt insignificant, not weak, just basic. The system continued without waiting. Pill system. Another layer formed. Pill classification system. Healing pills. Recovery of physical damage. Chi condensation pills. Accelerated energy gathering. Breakthrough pills. Realm advancement support. Soul nourishment pills. Spiritual stabilization. Tao enlightenment pills. Law comprehension enhancement. Kael's eyes flickered slightly. So that was what they had accused him of stealing. Spirit condensation pills. A resource worth killing for. But now, it felt smaller than the truth unfolding in front of him. The system continued. Almost desperately now. Amphora treasure classification. Spirit treasures. Energy amplification objects. Ancient relics. Inherited cultivation tools. Tao fragments. Law residue objects. Heavenly treasures. Reality-altering artifacts. Kael exhaled slowly. So everything is levels. He whispered, but the system was not finished. It was pushing further, as if trying to prove the world had structure. That Kael could still be placed somewhere. Final classification attempt initiated. The dungeon suddenly shook slightly, not physically, but as if something inside reality had tightened. Kael felt it too. Pressure. From above. From outside. Something watching the system's attempt. The interface flickered violently. Then, a final system overlay appeared. Attempting host classification. Silence. Then, Chi compatibility. Failed. Foundation compatibility. Failed. Core formation compatibility. Failed. Nascent soul compatibility. Failed. Each failure echoed like a crack in glass. Kael didn't move, but his expression changed slightly. Not fear, not confusion. Recognition. The system slowed, then added something new. Anomaly detected beyond classification limits. The text distorted slightly, as if resisting its own conclusion. Host exceeds defined cultivation hierarchy. Power system insufficient for measurement. The dungeon grew silent again. Even the faint ambient noise of dripping water seemed to stop. Kael spoke softly. So I don't exist in your system. The system hesitated. For the first time, it did not immediately respond. Then, one final line appeared, heavier than all the rest. Conclusion. Host is not a cultivator. Host is an unknown rule-breaker entity. A pause. Then, reclassification. Anomaly class, void category. The moment those words appeared, the dungeon lights flickered, not from energy, but from reality distortion. Kael felt it again. That feeling, a tension, not from the sect, not from the system, but from something much farther away, something above classification itself. And this time, it was no longer silent. External observation intensity increasing. Unknown authority response detected. Kael slowly looked up, into the darkness above the dungeon. Someone is watching. And for the first time, the system agreed. Yes. The word lingered in the air longer than it should have. Void category. Kael Veyron did not understand what that truly meant, but something inside him reacted to it, not emotionally, physically, very subtly at first, like a pulse that did not belong to his heartbeat. The dungeon air shifted. The cold stone beneath him seemed to forget its temperature for a moment, as if reality had briefly lost consistency. Kael noticed it. The system noticed it faster. Warning, the interface flickered. Host internal energy fluctuation detected. Source unknown. Kael looked down at his own body. Nothing appeared different. The chains were still there. The suppression seals still active. And yet, something felt less fixed, as if his existence was no longer fully anchored. A faint pressure built inside his chest. Not pain, not discomfort, more like something trying to stretch outward from inside him. The system reacted immediately. Stability alert, attempting suppression reinforcement. The chains on his wrists glowed brighter. Red runes ignited with force. But instead of calming the feeling, it made it worse. Kael's fingers twitched slightly, and the moment he did, the dungeon walls around him emitted a faint cracking sound. Not physical cracks, but spiritual distortion fractures. Kael froze. What is happening? He whispered. The system did not answer immediately. Instead, it began to panic. Energy behavior deviating from known cultivation laws. Recalculating containment protocols. Reinforcement failure risk increasing. Kael slowly inhaled. The air felt heavier now. Not oppressive like before, but dense, like reality itself had become thicker. And then, it happened. A faint black flicker appeared in the air in front of him. Not light, not shadow. Something between both. It appeared for less than a second, then vanished. Kael's eyes sharpened. He had seen it, even if only briefly. That wasn't chi, he said quietly. The system responded instantly. Too instantly. Correct. Kael paused. That answer was not normal. It was direct, unfiltered, almost defrayed. Energy classification mismatch confirmed. Host internal structure is not chi-based. The dungeon suddenly felt colder again, but not in temperature, in presence, like something had stepped closer. Without moving, Kael stood slowly. Chains clinked, but something strange happened. The suppression effect that should have kept him weak was no longer fully effective. His body felt lighter, not stronger, but freer. The system noticed. Warning, suppression efficiency dropping. Unknown energy is interfering with seal logic. Kael raised his hand slightly, just observing, and for a brief moment, a second flicker appeared, longer this time. Black, not darkness, not shadow, a distortion, reality folding inward and refusing to define itself. The system reacted violently. Error. Energy signature is mutating in real time. Host is not absorbing chi. Host is rewriting energy structure. Kael's eyes narrowed. Rewriting? The concept didn't feel real. And yet, something inside him resonated with it, as if the word itself was correct. The dungeon walls trembled slightly, not collapsing, but resisting something unseen, like reality itself was holding its breath. Kael took one step forward, and the moment his foot touched the ground, a faint ripple spread outward. Not impact, not force, just presence. And the stone, beneath him, faded slightly, as if its definition had weakened. Kael froze again, looking down. "I didn't attack," he said quietly. The system responded immediately. No action detected. Passive energy overflow confirmed. Kael's expression changed slightly. Passive. He hadn't done anything. And yet, reality reacted. The system continued. But its tone had shifted completely now. Less structured, more urgent. Host classification updated. Void category instability increasing. Containment priority escalated. Kael slowly lifted his head. Containment? That word felt different, heavier than the rest. And somewhere far above the dungeon, in the Sect's formation hall, a faint alarm rune flickered once, then twice, then shattered. Kael did not know that, but he felt something else. Attention, not observation anymore, not scanning. Recognition. Something had started looking back at him properly, and for the first time, Kael Veyron was no longer just being analyzed. He was being measured as a threat. The dungeon was no longer isolated. Something had changed in the way it existed, not physically, but in how it was perceived, as if the boundary between this underground space and the outside world had started to thin. Kael Veyron stood still. The strange distortion around him had not disappeared. It had only stabilized slightly. Not gone, just contained. Barely. The system interface in front of him flickered again, but now it was no longer analyzing him. It was trying to hide him. Warning. External detection probability increasing. Initiating concealment protocol. Kael's eyes narrowed slightly. Concealment? Before the system could continue, a faint tremor passed through the dungeon. Not from below. From above. Very distant. But real. Kael felt it. Something had shifted outside. Not in the dungeon. In the sect itself. Meanwhile, far above the underground chamber, inside the Azure Cloud Sect's inner formation hall, an ancient monitoring array flickered, once stable for hundreds of years, now unstable. A single rune lit up red, then another, then, crack, one of the outer formation plates shattered on its own. An elder inside the hall stepped back immediately. "What is this reaction?" he muttered. "This dungeon shouldn't trigger high-level alerts." The formation continued to tremble, but it wasn't reacting to an invasion. It was reacting to something inside, something alive. Back in the dungeon, Kael suddenly felt it too. A pressure, not physical, not spiritual energy, something deeper, like the world itself had shifted its attention slightly toward him. The system reacted instantly. External authorities can detect it. Unknown origin, layer mismatch, concealment protocol failing. Kael frowned slightly. Layer? The system did not answer clearly. Instead, fragmented warnings appeared. Heavenly detection probability, 3%. Increasing, 6%. 9%. The dungeon air felt heavier again, but differently this time. Not oppressive, observational, like something far away was focusing its gaze. Kael slowly looked upward, through stone, through earth, through distance that should not matter. "Something is looking down," he said quietly. The system responded, and this time it hesitated between every word. "Yes." A pause. Higher layer existence is attempting confirmation. Kael's expression changed slightly. Higher layer? The system finally expanded, not as structured data, but as forced explanation, as if it had no choice. Known reality hierarchy consists of multiple strata. Mortal layer, cultivation layer, heavenly authority layer. Kael listened silently. Entities in higher layers monitor anomalies that exceed structural rules. A brief pause. Then, "You are currently being registered." Kael didn't respond immediately. He simply processed that sentence. Registered. That word felt wrong, like being written into something he didn't agree to exist in. The system continued quickly, almost urgently now. Concealment protocol unstable. Host signature leaking. Containment seal interference increasing. Kael looked down at his chains. They were still glowing, still suppressing. But now, they looked less like restraints, and more like fragile attempts at control. A faint sound echoed from above again, not in the dungeon, but in the world's perception of it, like distant thunder with no storm. Kael felt it clearly now. That presence, not watching like before, but confirming, verifying. Something had identified him as real. And in that moment, the system displayed one final message, slower than everything else. Heavier. Warning. Host has entered attention scope of Heavenly Observation Authority. Silence. Kael closed his eyes briefly. Not in fear, not in acceptance, just understanding. When he opened them again, something inside him had settled. Not calm, not stable, but decided. So this is how it is. He whispered, and for the first time since entering the dungeon, he stopped being something hidden. He became something seen. The dungeon had changed again, not visually, but fundamentally. Kael Veyron could feel it now. The world around him was no longer just space. It was pressure, observation, and resistance, as if reality itself had begun to treat him differently, not as a prisoner, not as a disciple, but as an anomaly that needed to be contained. Kael slowly lowered his gaze. The faint distortion around his body had not disappeared, but it was no longer random. It was responding, like something inside him had begun to synchronize with it. The system interface flickered again, but this time it did not immediately analyze. It waited, as if uncertain whether to proceed. Warning, host energy instability has reached critical threshold. Containment reinforcement required. Kael tilted his head slightly. Containment again, he repeated softly. But this time, he did something different. He tried to feel it. Not the dungeon, not the chains, but inside himself. And there, he noticed it. Something was there. Not chi, not energy as described by the system. It was unformed, like a space that had not decided what it wanted to be. Kael raised his hand slowly. The chains clinked, but he didn't stop. For the first time, he consciously tried to move that internal presence. The moment he did, the dungeon reacted, not violently, but instantly. A faint black ripple spread from his palm. Not force, not pressure, something closer to absence. A distortion where energy refused to behave normally. The system reacted immediately. Warning, host is actively interacting with unknown energy source. Energy type does not match any cultivation framework. Kael stared at his hand. This isn't chi, he said quietly. The system responded without hesitation. Correct. Short, direct, final. Kael's expression tightened slightly. Then what is it? For the first time, the system did not answer immediately. Instead, it ran multiple failed classifications in rapid sequence. Chi framework, failed. Spirit energy framework, failed. Soul energy framework, failed. Law energy framework, failed. Each failure stacked faster than the last. Like panic, Kael felt it too. The energy in his hand was not growing stronger. It was becoming clearer, more defined, as if it was deciding its shape in real time. The dungeon air trembled again, very subtly, but noticeably. Kael clenched his fingers slightly, and the black distortion tightened, not expanding, compressing. The system interface flickered violently. Host energy is self-structuring. Impossible. No cultivation system supports autonomous energy formation. Kael looked at the floating interface. Autonomous? The system hesitated, then responded. Energy is forming without external cultivation method, without technique, without framework. A pause. Then, this violates cultivation law logic. Kael slowly lowered his hand. The black distortion did not disappear. It simply stayed, hovering, alive in a way chi was not. So I don't need your system to use this. Kael said quietly. The system responded instantly. Incorrect. Host requires stabilization protocols. Kael looked up slightly. Stabilization? Without control framework, energy will evolve unpredictably. Kael paused, then looked at his hand again. The distortion was still there, but it was not chaotic. It was listening, as if it had already accepted him. And that realization made something inside the system escalate further. Emergency containment escalation initiated. Warning level upgraded. Void class anomaly active. The dungeon suddenly felt heavier again, but not from pressure, from attention, from response. Somewhere far above, the sex formation systems flickered again, more violently this time. But Kael did not notice that anymore, because something else had happened. The energy in his hand had started to spread, not outward like fire, but inward into space itself, like reality was being rewritten at a microscopic level. Kael whispered, "It's changing everything it touches." The system confirmed, "Yes." A long pause followed. Then, host energy does not obey cultivation law. It replaces it. Silence. Kael slowly closed his hand. The distortion vanished. But not because it stopped existing, because it stopped needing expression. It had already integrated. And in that moment, Kael Veyron understood something without being told. This power was not something he learned, not something he trained, not something he inherited. It was something that rewrote him while existing inside him. And somewhere far away, something began to notice that change more clearly. The dungeon was no longer stable, not structurally, but conceptually. Something inside it had changed the way it behaved, like a rule had been quietly rewritten. Kael Veyron did not notice it immediately, because for him, nothing had changed. He still stood in the same place, still wore the same chains, still existed in the same darkness. But the system noticed everything, and this time, it was no longer confident. Warning, containment field integrity dropping. External structure interference detected. Kael looked slightly upward. External again? He murmured, but before the system could respond, a sound echoed from far above, not inside the dungeon, but through it, a deep vibration, like a bell being struck inside the earth. The entire dungeon corridor trembled slightly. Dust fell from the ceiling, not collapsing, but reacting. Kael paused. "That's not me," he said quietly. The system responded instantly. Correct. Short, direct, but heavier than before. External containment formations are responding to internal anomaly leakage. Kael's eyes narrowed slightly. Leakage? And then it happened. A faint black ripple appeared again near his hand. But this time, he had not summoned it. It appeared on its own, slowly spreading outward like ink in water. Kael didn't move. He just watched it. The ripple touched the dungeon wall, and for a brief moment, the wall did something impossible. It forgot its own hardness. A section of stone softened, not breaking, not cracking, just losing definition. As if stone was no longer a valid concept there. The system reacted violently. Warning. Reality structure destabilization detected. Passive energy leakage confirmed. Kael slowly turned his head toward the wall. "I didn't do anything," he said. The system responded immediately. Action is not required. Existence alone is sufficient trigger. Silence followed. Kael processed that sentence. Existence alone, not cultivation, not intent, just being, above the dungeon. Inside the Azure Cloud Sect formation hall, the monitoring array exploded with light. A senior elder stepped back instantly. What is this reaction? Dungeon suppression arrays are collapsing from inside. Another elder rushed forward. This level of fluctuation, it should be impossible from a sealed prisoner. The formation pillars began to shake, not violently, but uncontrollably, like they were trying to calculate something they could not understand. Back in the dungeon, Kael felt it, not the noise, but the attention increasing again. The system interface flickered. External observation intensity rising. Containment authority requesting confirmation. Kael frowned slightly. They can see this? The system hesitated, then answered. Not directly, but they can observe the effect. Kael looked at his hand again. The black distortion had not disappeared. It had simply stopped obeying intention. It was spreading through space like a natural phenomenon, and the dungeon itself was becoming part of that phenomenon. Kael took one step forward, just a single step, and the moment his foot touched the ground, a soft ripple spread outward, much larger than before, not destructive, but absolute. For a brief instant, the dungeon corridor ahead of him ceased to be fixed. Walls lost rigidity, space lost direction, distance lost meaning. And then it returned, but something had changed. The corridor ahead was no longer exactly the same as before. It had been rewritten slightly, not visibly, but fundamentally. Kael stared forward. "I walked," he said quietly. The system responded. "Yes." A pause, and reality adjusted. Silence. Kael slowly exhaled, not in shock, not in fear, but in understanding forming too quickly to ignore. "So everything around me reacts," he said. The system confirmed again. "Correct." Another pause, longer this time. Host is no longer inside cultivation framework. Framework is inside host influence range. Kael slowly closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "Then this place is not my prison," he said softly. The system did not respond immediately, because for the first time, it had no correction to offer. And somewhere far above the sect, something much larger than formations finally confirmed it. An anomaly had not just been detected. It had begun to alter the system interface did not stabilize anymore. It flickered, not randomly, but like it was struggling to maintain its own structure. Kael Veyron noticed it. Even if the system tried to hide it, the hesitation was now obvious. Warning: core analysis engine instability detected. Host influence exceeding containment threshold. Kael tilted his head slightly. "You're getting slower," he said calmly. That sentence should not have mattered, but it did, because the system paused for a fraction longer than normal before responding. Correction: processing load increasing due to unknown variables. Kael looked at the floating interface. Unknown variables? The system did not respond immediately. Instead, multiple lines of broken calculations appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared incorrectly. It was no longer analyzing him. It was trying to rebuild its own logic while looking at him. Kael slowly raised his hand again, this time not to test anything, just instinctively. And the moment he did, the faint black distortion around him responded, not expanding, not spreading, but aligning, as if it had found direction. The system reacted instantly. Warning: host energy has entered structured resonance state. Unstable evolution detected. Kael frowned slightly. "Structured?" he repeated, but the system did not clarify. Instead, something new appeared. Attempting path classification. Kael's eyes narrowed slightly. Path. The dungeon trembled faintly again, but this time it wasn't reacting to power leakage. It was reacting to definition. The system continued, slower, heavier, like every word cost computation. Standard cultivation path, chi-based evolution, detected incompatibility. A pause. Reevaluating. Kael remained silent. The system continued. Alternative classification required. No known cultivation system matches host structure. Kael's expression changed slightly. Not emotion, but focus. The system paused again, longer this time. Then a new line appeared, generating provisional classification. The dungeon air shifted, very subtly, like reality had leaned in closer. Then the words formed. Classification. Void path, unstable prototype. Silence. Kael read it, slowly. Void path. He repeated. The system responded immediately, but now its tone was no longer neutral. It was careful, almost restrained. Warning: this classification is not part of known cultivation hierarchy. It is a simulation-generated label. Kael looked at his hand again. The black distortion was still there, but now it felt different. more structured, less chaotic, as if it had accepted a name. And that realization triggered something far away. Inside the sect's monitoring hall, all formation pillars suddenly went dark, not breaking, not exploding, just shutting down. An elder stepped back in shock. It's rejecting all detection arrays. That's impossible. Another elder whispered, this isn't suppression failure. This is system override. Back in the dungeon, Kael noticed something else. The system was no longer trying to classify him. It was trying to contain him. Emergency protocol escalation. Attempting force stabilization. Host influence exceeding system authority limits. Kael slowly lowered his hand. You're afraid now, he said quietly. The system paused. For the first time, it did not deny it immediately. Correction, a pause. Longer than before. System is adapting. Kael's eyes narrowed slightly. Adapting to what? The system did not answer directly. Instead, it displayed one final line. To host evolution rate. Silence. Kael exhaled slowly. And for the first time, he understood something clearly. This system was not guiding him anymore. It was following him. And somewhere beyond the dungeon, beyond the sect, beyond recorded cultivation law, something larger than observation systems began to register an anomaly that was no longer static. It was evolving in real time. The dungeon had become quiet again, but this silence was not the same as before. Before it was emptiness. Now, it felt like waiting, as if something had already been decided, and the world was simply observing the outcome. Kael Veyron stood still in the center of the corridor. The faint void distortion around him no longer flickered randomly. It moved in subtle patterns, controlled but not by intention, more like it had accepted existence. The system interface in front of him was unstable, not flickering anymore, breaking, slowly. Warning, core system authority degradation detected. Kael looked at it calmly. Degradation? He repeated softly. The system did not respond immediately. Instead, multiple overlapping lines appeared at once, then failed to synchronize. Host influence exceeds control architecture. Containment protocols failing. Recalibrating authority hierarchy. Kael tilted his head slightly. Authority hierarchy? The system hesitated, longer than before, and then it made a decision. Reclassification attempt. Void path confirmed. Updating system dependency. A pause. Long. Heavy. Then something unprecedented happened. The interface dimmed slightly, not disappearing, but lowering itself, like it was no longer the dominant structure in this interaction. Kael noticed it immediately. You're stepping back, he said quietly. The system responded, but its tone had changed completely. No longer directive, no longer instructive. System no longer operates as primary authority. System now operates as adaptive interface. Silence. Kael stared at the floating interface. Interface. He repeated. That word meant something important, but not for him, for the system, above the dungeon, far above the sect, beyond formations and monitoring arrays. Something reacted, not violently, but instantly. A distant structure, one not belonging to the sect, flashed once, then twice, then stabilized. A presence had confirmed something. Not a threat, not a cultivator, not even an anomaly anymore. A category that did not previously exist in recorded law systems had been detected back in the dungeon. Kael suddenly felt it. Again, that sensation. Not pressure, not observation, but recognition from something far beyond the sect. The system displayed one final structured message. Slower, heavier, almost reluctant. Final classification locked. Entity designation. Void path host. A pause. Warning. This designation is not recognized by heavenly authority systems. Kael's eyes narrowed slightly. Heavenly authority. He repeated. The system continued. Host existence is outside recorded cultivation law hierarchy. Host is not governed by known realm progression systems. Host is classified as... The interface flickered. Once, twice, like it was resisting its own conclusion. Then it appeared. Existence beyond law. Silence. The dungeon air stopped moving completely. Not frozen, not still, just undefined for a moment. Kael slowly exhaled, not in shock, not in fear, but in understanding forming too clearly. So, I don't belong to your system, he said quietly. The system did not correct him. For the first time, it had nothing left to correct. Then, a new alert appeared, different from all before. Not system-originated, not sect-originated, something higher. External heavenly observation confirmed anomaly resonance. Kael's gaze slowly lifted, toward the darkness above, beyond stone, beyond earth, beyond the sect itself. It's coming again, he whispered, and this time the system responded with only one word. Yes. Silence returned, but it was no longer peaceful, because somewhere above the world, something had finally acknowledged him properly, not as a disciple, not as a cultivator, not as an anomaly, but as something that should not exist within any law. And episode 1 ended there, not with victory, not with defeat, but with recognition from beyond reality itself.